Hey folks, it's not often that I delve into thriller territory, but today's title is an odd one. See, I'll be talking about Brian Wilson's The Forest Cathedral, a walking sim which addresses the historical investigation of Rachel Carson into DDT. Semi-historical. It takes a few liberties, and I don't just mean the platforming segments, but we'll tackle that later. For now, it's time to ask the question: was Forest Cathedral a treat, or did it leave me pining for a better experience? I'm your host Arlian, let's find out together. Science Island. For Rachel Carson, this research position was a unique opportunity. 3 months out in the field, completely isolated save for her lines of communication. Daunting, yes, but not without its silver linings. After all, thanks to the wonders of DDT, she wouldn't have to worry about mosquitoes eating her alive. Still, it's not long before things begin to go awry. At first, perhaps it could be chalked up to loneliness, but it's not long before her studies begin to uncover troubling trends, dangerous discoveries which she's caught in the midst of. Now, as far as execution goes, it's not an overly complex affair, with the meat of its narrative playing out between linear character conversations and monologues which play out as you progress forward. That said, it was the segments where I was simply witnessing something happening that frequently found up being the most unsettling. The game has a certain cinematic flair that really helps to hammer home that there's something wrong with the situation. Speaking of which, plot-wise, I don't think DDT being problematic is a spoiler. If you know your history, then you know it's been banned for quite some time, and you might even know the reasons. That said, even if you're out of the loop, it's pretty hard to miss every other clue the game's introduction beats you over the head with. Like the cold opening, having you literally spray the stuff around. Or wait, how about the fact that barely 2 minutes later the game decides to focus on the fact that mosquito problems have been dealt with due to the wonders of DDT. It's not really subtle by any stretch of the imagination, and yet this lack of subtlety can be forgiven since The Forest Cathedral isn't just a retelling of historical events. If it was just that, it would be a substantially drier game. As it is, it has its own twists and turns it wants to lead a player down, and whilst it's more than happy to see charming bits of camp throughout its dialogue, it's just as eager to sow sinister scenes into the mix. A juxtaposition that feels fairly complementary to the whole. A sentiment I can't necessarily extend to its gameplay. Simply put, The Forest Cathedral is a bit of an odd duck. I know I kicked off the review with this comment, but while it's technically a walking simulator, there's no real reward for going off the beaten path, eschewing the joy of exploration in favor of a journey that is substantially more linear than you'd otherwise expect. And before anyone creeps into my comments with something about the scanning device, no! If anything, its existence only further highlights the linear nature of the game, since it quite literally serves as a waymarker to the next objective. And yet, that's not to say it's entirely bereft of interesting mechanics. Every so often, Rachel will find herself needing to use one of the various research tools scattered around the island, which means she needs to enlist the help of the little man that makes computers work. Because yes, this is a sentence I just said, no, you didn't just drop a hit of acid. Weirdness aside, this winds up serving as the perfect excuse to sneak in a series of puzzle platforming stages. Initially, these are fairly basic, but it's not long until you'll be using the full range of your Game & Watch adjacent avatar's ability to jump, dash, and swing his sword. Quite honestly, these segments are pretty neat, providing a decent array of stages to delve into, which continue to introduce different obstacles throughout the entirety of your journey. What's more, even though you die in one hit, they do tend to be fairly forgiving with the placement of their checkpoints. Tend to be being the operative word here, because a couple of these stages wind up feeling a touch sadistic. For instance, this unnecessary fucking walk, which seems to be put in place just to infuriate the player. I stress infuriate, because it took me something like 15 or 20 tries to actually clear this segment, and that walk just felt like more of a slap every time it happened. And it's not like this is an isolated slice of sadism either. Every so often, despite the relative bite-sized nature of the stages, you'll come across something that just feels like it's been designed in such a way as to compound the overall sense of exasperation that accompanies each fresh failure. It doesn't need to be designed over as large an area as these obstacles occupy, it just is. Honestly though, it's fine. These are more outliers than rules of thumb, and on the whole, I really do love the platforming segments, especially given they're incorporated pretty neatly into the Mind Screws and also play with the medium that the Forest Cathedral has to offer. Which, yeah, visually speaking, there's some decent moments you'll get to spectate over the course of your journey. Small bits of fuckery that help to inspire tension and an uncertainty for what's coming next. And yes, the care taken into making the 2D segments stick out, especially when they so closely mirror what's happening in the story. And then, well, there's the other bits. Take that initial interview cutscene you've encountered. Remember this? Well, take a closer look this time, because whenever a character is speaking, the camera isn't actually pointed at them, it's pointed at the listener. That's right. Instead of animating character expressions or lip syncing, you just wind up staring at an idle expression with the perspective only shifting when it's the other character's turn to speak. Once I noticed this, I couldn't unnotice it, so I guess sorry. And that's not the only bit of dialogue-related visual weirdness either. Once you transition to the long-distance communication segments, the game switches over to pixel art portraits? While this feels a bit jarring to begin with, it gets really weird once you realize the issue from before persists. Specifically, every character has an idle state where they're busy looking incredibly shifty like they've stolen from a jar of cookies, and a talking state. While this wouldn't be so bad, there's something about the way the expressions are shared between the cast which makes it hard to ignore, especially given how short the looped animations are. And that's without getting into stuff like this log here. I'm just nitpicking at this point though, so yeah, no, let's move on to the audio. And frankly, this is probably one of my favorite elements of the game. The music and sound effects do a great job of establishing mood and often serve to build suspense, a sense of anxious dread, or even a feeling of disorientation. It's just solid. The voice acting, on the other hand, is a bit weirder for me. While it's not bad per se, there's definitely moments where the line readings feel off. While this sometimes feels like it's in service to the narrative, just another bit of weirdness for you to navigate, other times it's jarring to the point of being goofy. I still found it overall good, and there's plenty of segments that felt fun to listen to, and maybe there's just a few that are meant to be more unhinged once you have context. But yeah, that's the Forest Cathedral, and on the whole, it's a decent enough experience. It's hard to quantify really, since its overall short length does help to ensure it doesn't overstay its welcome. That said, the linearity and the rougher edges made it more of a mixed bag for me. At the end of the day, while I enjoyed it, it was flawed enough that I feel more comfortable calling it a fumble rather than wholeheartedly recommending it. Honestly, that rating does a decent job of describing how it comes so close to reaching its goal at times, only to fall short. Also, the fact that it has a single save slot and autosaves is a little bit annoying. Anywho, thanks for tuning in. If you have something to say, leave a comment, and if you like indie reviews, hit subscribe and the bell. For the Discord savvy, check the descriptions to find the Crit Hit Cauldron, and a link to my Patreon if you want to see reviews early or support the channel. Which, a big thank you to Andy Noted, Greenwich Babby, and Shrimp Mania. You folks literally put food in my cat's bowls and on my table. Also, P.S. if you folks like coffee mugs, check out my merch house. That said, I'll catch you on the next episode of Crit Hit. Take care till then, folks.